Lawyers of Reddit, what was your "oh shit" moment in court? Part 2. Medical malpractice defense lawyer here, representing hospitals and doctors. This was not my "oh shit" moment, but plaintiff's "oh shit" moment. For context, usually at trial, both plaintiff and defendant will have an expert physician testify as to their opinion, to whether the doctor or hospital performed everything correctly. I thoroughly researched plaintiff's expert, who was an obgyn, baby delivery, and found out he had been suspended a number of times for his own botched deliveries, and giving incorrect medical testimony, to help plaintiff's cases. During the actual day of trial, turns out, he was not licensed to practice medicine independently without supervision from another physician, and he was 1 year into his 3-year suspension. Plaintiff's lawyers had no idea about their own expert's background, and they just sat there with a blank look on their face. Needless to say, during cross-examination, we destroyed his credibility, and won at trial. New judge, with a chip on his shoulder. Plaintiff called me to get an adjournment on a summary judgment motion I had made. They wanted more time to submit opposition. I don't have a problem with this, but the court refuses to accept the adjournment request over the phone, and says, we have to appear in court the next day. So, I go, and plaintiff doesn't show up. When our case gets called, I request the adjournment, and the judge explodes on me, demands to know why, insists he doesn't grant adjournments, just yells for no reason, in front of a courtroom full of attorneys. I tell him, it's plaintiff's request, and they are not there, they want more time. But he doesn't want to hear it and just says, request denied, call plaintiff and tell them, to get here by second call. So, my oh shit moment is, that I just won my case, because the judge decided to be a butthole. I call plaintiff, and let them know what happened, and they panic. They are about to lose their case. The judge has to grant my motion, it's unopposed. There is no way they can get an attorney to court in time. So, the case is called again. And again I'm the only attorney on the case. I go up to the defendant's table, with the biggest shit-eating grin on my face, and say, Your Honor, I'm here on behalf of defendants with an unopposed summary judgment motion. Everyone that saw me get yelled at, suddenly realizes, what I was doing, getting yelled at for trying to be helpful, and what judge's outburst meant. I win, suck it. The judge has no choice, but to soften and rehear my request for an adjournment, and grant it. Follow-up, plaintiff's client died, and the motion was never opposed or heard. When they tried to reactivate the case with an administrator, I reminded them, that my motion was the first thing to get heard once the case was restarted. They actually read it, knew they had no chance of beating it, and discontinued against my client, without ever having to argue the motion. Not in court, but at a tribunal, and also I was plaintiff, suing for wrongful termination. My rep, so, you terminated him, because he was ill. Employer, yes. My rep, and he was ill, because he's disabled. Employer, yes. My rep, so, you fired someone, for being disabled. Employer, yes. Not me, but my former law partner. She was in court representing a client, I think in a hearing for a restraining order, against her soon-to-be, ex-husband. Our client was telling the judge, that when they met to exchange the children for visitation, the ex had kicked her. He immediately angrily shouted, she can't prove it, I didn't leave a mark. Thanks buddy. I was a baby lawyer, in my first year, representing the 19-year-old child, of some rich people, in San Mateo County, California. My client had gone on a bit of a shoplifting spree, and we were cleaning all her cases up with a global plea, meaning, we handled them, all at once. Being new, I filled out the plea form wrong, swapping the counts she was charged with, for the counts she was pleading to. It's an easy mistake to make. Every court has their own unique form, and I was unfamiliar with San Mateo's. The judge calls my line, starts reading off the plea form, notices the mistake, and then starts screaming at the top of his lungs, counsel. What is this? What is this? Is this your first day on the job? This is a court of law and we do not accept mistakes. Fill this plea form out correctly, or I will have you taken into custody for contempt. I did not expect a reaction like that. My client, who had clearly just taken a huge bong rip at 8 a.m., and who was wearing an all-pink velvet tracksuit, was looking at me, like I was the biggest idiot in the world. I corrected the plea form. The judge made me wait, until the very end of the calendar to take my plea. Afterward, he called me up to the bench. In private he told me, sorry to ream you like that. Everyone messes the plea form up, so, I always pick the youngest lawyer to yell at. The older guys will grumble and complain, but if you noticed, They all fixed their own forms, and we didn't have any more problems. Keeps the calendar running smooth. Where did you go to law school? After that he invited me into his office for coffee, and gave me some really good life and work advice. Turns out, he likes talking to new lawyers. TLDR, judge loses his shit in court over a simple mistake. Turns out, it was all a show for the other lawyers, and I have one of the worst and best court experiences of my early career. Represented a woman, charged with multiple very serious felonies. She insisted that in the months before the offense, she'd been seriously dating one of the detectives, who ultimately wound up investigating and testifying in her case. For a variety of reasons, I trusted this client and believed her, even though the detective never disclosed the relationship in his report. So, during his testimony, I ask, "Detective Smith, you had a romantic relationship with Ms. Defendant, correct?" He goes, "What? No." And is visibly offended. The judge look at me, like I've lost my mind. The Commonwealth attorney audibly says, "What?" I'm freaking out because a large part of my cross-and argument was focused on the bias formed by the prior relationship, and now I've got nothing, and I've lost all credibility. I try again. "Detective Smith, have you had a sexual relationship with Ms. Defendant?" As the Commonwealth rises to object, and the judge starts to scold me, the detective goes, "Oh, yay. We've had sex, it just wasn't very romantic." Edit/update, state is Virginia. The jury acquitted my client of the relatively minor charge that the detective in my story was involved with, but convicted of the other, much more serious charges that detective had nothing to do with. There was a confession and video on the serious charges, so it was kind of a no-brainer. Sorry, I'm being kind of intentionally vague. There are no confidentiality concerns, since this all happened in open court, but it's distasteful to give out too much information about a client. The detective was not disqualified, his testimony was not thrown out. Impeachment, no matter how good, doesn't result in you getting to throw out a witness's testimony entirely. By the way, it wasn't really the sex that was the issue, it was that he didn't disclose it to anyone, and his repeated insistence under questioning that he didn't disclose it, because it was irrelevant. Like Watergate, it's not the crime, it's the cover-up that gets you. But I don't get to demand the judge throw out the testimony, or that charge, just because the cop failed to disclose a prior relationship with the defendant. I just get to point it out, argue it in closing, and then hope the jury also sees the relevance. Not a lawyer, but a defendant. As a teenager, I got busted with a couple of buddies, throwing eggs at cars. We were only actually in the courtroom for our sentencing, there was no trial. The judge called each of us up individually, to ask us if we had anything to say. One of my friends tells the judge that he is a good kid, who doesn't normally do things like this. Lie, we used to do it all the time, and that I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I wish there was a video of my other friend and I, sitting in the benches watching this happen. We simultaneously dropped our heads into our hands, because we couldn't believe that idiot just said that. The judge was not pleased, and she took the opportunity to remind him that going to a store, buying eggs, going to another location across town, and then throwing those eggs at cars, was not just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Not a lawyer, but I got in enough trouble in my teens to know what a judge does or doesn't like. Uncles and father decide they're going to conserve my grandmother and put her in a secured perimeter memory facility. In reality, they just wanted to piss away her $20 million estate. We end up in court with our lawyers. One thing I know about most judges and courtrooms, they want to be revered like a church. No talk back, no talking out of turn, wear a suit, even if it's a $20 goodwill suit. Father, uncles, all show up. All of them spend about an hour bad-mouthing me. I'm keeping my mouth shut, looking at my feet. One of my uncles tries to examine me. I just keep my mouth shut until the judge tells him he's not a lawyer, and I'm not examination. None of them are well-dressed, sneakers, dirty sweatpants. My uncle, who's the ringleader, decides to start talking over his own lawyers. My lawyer makes some comment, the judge starts talking to her, and my uncle's lawyer says something like, "Now hold on ladies." All they had to do was keep their mouths shut, and not tell their lawyers how to do their job, and they would have won. They pretty much handed Grandma and I the win. Corporate lawyer, but took on a pro bono immigration matter, helping a victim of domestic abuse get her immigration status sorted out. She had been in the country for 20 years, originally legally, but not anymore. It took us multiple months to get a hearing scheduled. We've spent hours in U.S. Customs and Immigration Services offices by this point. Her situation is somewhat precarious, and we need to resolve this. She told me, a few weeks before the hearing, that she needed to reschedule, because she was going to be out of the country. She said, her daughter was going through a high-risk pregnancy, and would be giving birth during the time, and my client was the only caregiver, available family, for her daughter. That's fine, we put together a letter, get a note from the daughter's doctor, about the medical necessity, etc. USCIS gives us a hard time about it, but ultimately, hearing is rescheduled. My client and her other daughter come to the rescheduled hearing. Client gets asked about recent trips out of the country. Well, I went on vacation to my home country last month. Instant cringe. She's in the US illegally, and it's unclear whether or not she should have been traveling on the passport she was. I jumped in and tried to clean it up for her, and thankfully, this USCIS official was more interested in moving us through the system than getting hung up on past issues. However, she within an inch of this all collapsing around her, or getting kicked out of the country. Added to add, I believe my client's trip was justified and necessary. I think she just misspoke. I spoke to both the pregnant daughter and the doctor who was caring for her while all of this was playing out. Still a scary moment. My client is the one that probably thought, oh shit. Before trial, I was trying to convince my client to give his ex-wife $200 in child support monthly while he was looking for a job. He had a job, but he was paid under the table for the exact reason of him not wanting to pay for child support. I tried to explain to him that if we go into the courtroom without an agreement between him and his ex, the amount the judge will impose him would probably be a lot higher. He kept saying he couldn't pay that much, that he was jobless and poor. After fighting with him about how the judge won't care about this, and how he should be a decent parent and take care of his kids, he said to me, I should have gotten a male lawyer. Women just don't get it. Since I was doing this for free, I just told him to F himself and that he was trash, and left him to look for another free lawyer, 20 minutes before his hearing. Edit, OMG, thank you for the platinum. This is the first time I get platinum or anything, LOL, and I'm so happy it was, because I told in a hole he was trash. Edit 2, more to the story, this was the second time his ex-wife sued him for child support. The first time she did, she got told by the judge that she needed to get a job, that child support was a 50-50 thing, so that she couldn't stay as a stay-at-home mom, and she actually started working. The guy was such a big of an ass that he chose to lose his well-paid job in a bank than to pay child support. In my country, many banks have a rule that if you get sued for child support, you can get fired, but this only happens until the bank gets the paper from court asking the bank to detain a percentage of their salary for child support. If you reach an agreement on the first hearing, this won't happen. So, yeah, he chose to lose his job, only so he wouldn't pay child support for his 2 kids. Not a lawyer, but I witnessed my ex-wife try to argue with the judge that she couldn't be accused of kidnapping our daughter, because our daughter was legally emancipated. Not a spoiler, she wasn't, at the time of the kidnapping. My ex had legal statutes written on small sheets of paper she had torn out of books in the jail library, and she kept arguing with the judge, after being told that none of it mattered. After the 5th time my ex interrupted the judge with her nonsense, the judge slammed her hands down, stood up, leaned over her bench, and told my ex that she had been a juvenile court judge for 20 years, and was well aware of the statutes. If she interrupted one more time, then she would be held in contempt, and spend several months more in jail. My lawyer held up his folder in front of his face to hide his grin during this exchange. I walked out with full legal and physical custody of my daughter, court-supervised visitation for my ex, and a full restraining order. Unfortunately, I'm not allowed to say too much, but basically, on charges of growing marijuana, stated he was growing herbs for medicine, and gestured air quotes with his hands, and then whispered, I kid you not, marijuana. Bro. Sat in on a personal injury case, where the plaintiff broke their leg in an accident, and had a doctor on the stand as an expert. The woman's lawyer begins questioning the doctor about their experience with leg injuries. He was a well-known orthopedic surgeon in the area. She asks if he has ever treated a tibia fracture. The leg bones are tibia and fibula, to which he only answers, no. Then she starts grilling him with questions about the tibia. After about 6 to 7 questions she asks, "How did you get a medical license, and have been able to practice medicine this long, if you've never treated a tibia fracture?" And begins a small rant about going after his credentials, and those that gave it to him, to which he simply responds, "There is no bone named, the tibia." The lawyer became beet red, and everyone in the room tried their best to keep from laughing, including the judge. It's hard to call stuff in court "oh shit" moments, most of the time, because generally, you know what's coming. Even in criminal defense. I had some flubs early in my solo practice, that more boiled down to lack of experience. But going for things that actually happened in court, I will go a little lighter than some of my fellow practitioners here. Closing argument in an assault case. I've learned to grow comfortable with my speaking style, and part of that is to cut loose a bit when it is appropriate. So, I make light of some of the state's allegations given the testimony by the prosecuting witness. There is one guy on the jury panel that thinks I'm just hilarious. I had to wait for him to stop laughing. The oh shit moment? When the jurors came back to return a verdict, the same Rotflow guy was elected foreman by the other jurors. Verdict was not guilty. Was in court for a directions hearing. The judge was already in a bad mood and asked why we were here for such a seemingly pointless litigation. Without giving details, he was right. The barrister starts to make our case, and I am taking notes about areas we need to further explore, when I hear, "Excuse me, why were you so rude to me?" The client, who had been told to not come, had come to court that day, and was evidently incensed by the judge, questioning the merit of their case. They berated the judge for about 3 minutes, with me and my co-counsel, first stunned, and then trying to shut them up, before he adjourned the hearing. The case did not go very well, to my client's surprise and fury. Big sigh. Not a lawyer, but I took my landlord to small claims court for refusing to return my security deposit without cause. I did my due diligence. I wrote a demand letter, looked up the law that he was breaking, and prepared evidence to show the judge. After I presented my case, and requested the full amount I was owed, plus damages to the full extent I was entitled to, the judge looked at me, and asked me if I was a lawyer. I'm pretty sure my former landlord had an oh shit moment, and I felt pretty good about my chances of getting my money back. I won the suit, but did not get full damages. Not a lawyer, but have been on a number of juries. Kid was being charged with arson in his high school. First sign of trouble, prosecutor is trying to get the investigator to say something specific. Note, this was a fire investigator. What did you see? It was a bathroom. Anything else? Sink? What else did you see? Mirrors. What else? Trash can. Anything in the trash can? Paper towels. Anything unusual about the paper towels? They were burned? Thank you. Then she calls the co-conspirator, who has made a plea deal, who according to opening statements, will testify that the kid/defendant started the fire. The kid spoke and acted like a stoner. What happened? We had some aftershave. We got some paper towels, and poured the aftershave on the towels. Then I lit them. I mean, he lit them. Your Honor, I'd like a recess. End of trial. UK. Bear with me on this one. I was in court, listening to the most boring old defense lawyer you've ever seen. He was questioning the arresting officer in the case. It was drugs, or something like that. Anyway, he's droning on about every little detail, and the magistrate was constantly telling him to hurry along. The arresting officer was getting noticeably annoyed, and the room became empty pretty quick. Everyone was very bored and annoyed. He was droning about details that I'm not sure anyone was really listening to, or cared about. Anyway, he went over arrest times and the likes with the officer, time he admitted the suspect and released him. He had bored the officer, to the point where he was barely paying attention. So, he was admitted in at 21:45 on the night in question? Yes, and released the night after, yes, and that was what? Just after 10 p.m.? Yes, what time after 10? I don't know, 10:15 maybe, so, my client was detained for more than 24 hours. Wait. The penny dropped. The officer let his guard down and had revealed he kept the defendant for more than 24 hours, which is the max time for detention in the UK. The defense rested, and the magistrate threw the case out immediately. Well played, sir, well played. 2 moments in a DUI trial. 1. Passenger is testifying for driver's sobriety. When the DA asks her, "You keep saying he was sober, but are you even tip certified?" A course for bartenders, so they can recognize drunk patrons. She was. 2. The head of the county's blood lab accidentally admitted he cranked the sensitivity of his machines way up because he was experimenting. When I was a trainee solicitor, I watched one of my colleagues' trials. Couple of ne'er-do-wells accused of racially abusing their neighbor. First Crown witness comes in, gives her name, and starts answering questions about the incident in question. From the public gallery, I can see both accused whispering to each other in the dock, then gesturing urgently to their respective lawyer. My colleague asks for the witness to be taken out of court and back to the witness room, because something unusual has come up, and we need to address you on it, to which the sheriff agrees. As soon as the door closes behind the witness, this relative bombshell is dropped: that witness is not who she says she is. I was like, oh my God. After some investigation by the court police officer, it turns out that the actual witness didn't want to attend court, so got her friend to go and pretend to be her. She had a script in her pocket that she'd clearly been revising in the witness room beforehand. No prizes for guessing which particular racial stereotype was in play here. Unbelievably, no action was ever taken against either the witness or her understudy. Plenty of good moments as a defense lawyer, but that one stands out as a "had no idea that was coming" moment. I did jury service back in the 90s in the UK, a 4-day trial where an estate manager, dude in charge of the farms on a big landowner's estate, was on trial for growing and distributing cannabis. The police had raided the greenhouses and surrounding land and found tons of weed in all stages of production. Dude claims that he is addicted to cannabis, and because his tolerance is so high, after smoking so much for so long, that he can only get a buzz from the very tips of the plant, where the THC content is most intense. Asks the court to believe that he just discards the rest of the plant, doesn't sell it, doesn't even give it away, just destroys the rest of the crop. So, it's the last day of evidence, where both sides sum up their case, and remind the jury of the salient points of what's been said. Dude himself has been quiet and respectful throughout, smart suit, softly spoken, stuck to his answers. I'd say the jury is not buying his claim, and as the judge reminds us, it's not about whether we think it should be legalized, it's not about whether we think he has even sold the remaining bits of his plans. All we need to find him guilty is to think that beyond reasonable doubt, he had at some point shared a single joint with a friend, and that was enough to convict him for supply on the counts against him. So, the jury isn't buying his story, but we are also looking at him thinking he's quite old, isn't doing anyone any real harm, etc., is unlikely to be running a massive dealing empire. Then on that last day, the public gallery, which has been empty all week, is suddenly full of the most blatantly stonery stoners you've seen in your life. One of them is even wearing an Adidas t-shirt. The jury files in, we sit down, we look at the public gallery, and I think it's safe to say, we stare at them. Defense barrister turns to see what we are looking at, and visibly slumps, then glowers at the solicitor and hisses, "Really? Such an own goal. TLDR, marijuana farmer, F up, by letting his customers come to court." I was representing a plaintiff in a hit-and-run case. Plaintiff is testifying and is, despite me preparing them for several hours the previous day, an absolutely terrible witness for her own case. Like, she couldn't even identify the street she was crossing when she was hit by the car. It was a major highway, and we had gone through the sequence of events countless times the day before the hearing. The oh shit moment came during cross-examination. Defense counsel pulls out a picture of my client dressed up and ready to hit the club, which was posted to Facebook the day after the alleged accident. I, thinking quickly, object, because the timestamp refers to when it was posted, not when it was taken. Defense counsel showed the picture to my client and asked her when the picture was taken. Sure enough, they say, it was taken the day after the accident, when she was supposedly in unbearable pain. Oh shit. Not a lawyer, but this happened when I was at a pre-college law school thing. We were going to the Court of Appeals near our law school, and right before we left, the English teacher, who I'm sure was just there to make sure no one in the group of 30-plus teenagers wasn't vaping in the back row, said, to bring a pencil and pad of paper to the trials, because, and I quote, "they're just so interesting, you know." Fast forward to sitting in on a murder trial, and there are signs everywhere saying that writing anything down was expressly prohibited. Then, the officer in the courtroom chewed someone, not in our group, out for writing stuff down, even though the stuff that person wrote wasn't related to the case, and then we all just turned our heads and stared at the teacher, who told us to do just that, and the look on his face as he slowly slid the pencil and paper into his jacket pocket so as to avoid getting caught will be something I will never forget.